Midnight in San Jose. You step up to a door on the second floor of a beautiful Victorian mansion. You turn the knob. The latch releases. You push. There is no room on the other side. There is no balcony, no railing, no staircase down, just open air and a clean drop to the garden below. That door is real. You can stand in front of it today, inside the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose, California. And the question it leaves hanging in your chest is, simple. Who builds a door that tries to kill you? People call this place haunted, cursed, a trap for ghosts, a fever dream in wood and stained glass. But the truth is more unsettling, because it is human. This house was shaped, room by room, by Sarah Winchester, the widow who inherited the Winchester rifle fortune. After losing her only child and her husband, she fled across the country and spent decades directing constant changes to a farmhouse until it became a maze. The legends say she believed angry spirits were hunting her, and that if she ever stopped building, she would die. Whether you believe the ghosts or not, the facts are enough. From 1886 to 1922, the original 8-room farmhouse grew into a sprawling mansion with 160 rooms, about 2,000 doors, about 10,000 windows, 47 stairways, and a reputation that refuses to fade. To neighbors, construction seemed to never cease. A bell was said to ring late at night. A small room deep inside the maze became known as the Seance Room, and in 1906, an earthquake tore through the house and changed it forever. Tonight, I want to take you through the story exactly as it unfolded, without turning it into a cartoon ghost ride. We will keep the dates, we will keep the people, we will keep the real place, and we will ask one question that is harder than any paranormal claim. What was Sarah Winchester really building? And why did she keep going when everything in her life had already been taken? Chapter 1. The woman who vanished into her own house. Imagine showing up for work at a construction site and almost never seeing the person who owns the place. Morning after morning, carpenters walked through the gates of an estate surrounded by orchards in the Santa Clara Valley. They picked up their tools and searched for instructions. Some days there were sketches. Some days there were a few sentences passed through the foreman. Some days there was nothing at all until a servant arrived and quietly pointed to the wall that needed to come down. The work was strange, not difficult in the normal sense. It was difficult because it felt like it was meant to be confusing. A staircase with steps too shallow to feel real. A door that opened into plaster. A window placed where a person could trip over it. And always the same rule: build, then change, then build again. Most building projects move toward completion. This one moved like a tide. It advanced, retreated, and returned somewhere else. The men did not press the widow with questions. She paid better than most jobs in the valley. She paid on time, in cash, every week. In the 1890s, that was not a small thing. This was an era of financial panic and layoffs. A steady paycheck could be the difference between feeding your children and watching them go hungry. So the workers stayed. They talked among themselves, of course. You would too. They whispered that the owner of the house lived like a shadow, moving at odd hours and rarely stepping into the open. They said she slept little. They said she changed bedrooms often. They said she walked the halls at night, listening to the house as if it could speak. And they said there was a room at the center of the maze where the widow met the dead. The stories of that room grew in the telling. A hidden space with one entrance and multiple exits. Hooks on the wall. A bell that rang at midnight. A second bell at 2 inches. The morning. The men could not prove any of it, but they could hear something. They could hear hammering long after sunset. They could hear the house alive with work when the rest of the valley went quiet. Neighbors said the sound never stopped. Day crews, night crews, a steady rhythm of nails, saws, and footsteps that echoed through the orchard fog like a heartbeat. The strange part is that all of this can be true at the same time. The widow could be reclusive, the work could be continuous, the house could be a labyrinth, and the reasons could still be much more complicated than the ghost story. To understand why, you have to travel back to the other side of the country and to the gun that made it all possible. Chapter 2. The Rifle That Built an Empire. The Winchester rifle is often described with a slogan: the gun that won the West. It was a lever-action repeating rifle that allowed a person to fire again and again, without the long pause of reloading a single shot at a time. That speed changed what violence looked like on a battlefield and on the frontier. It changed hunting. It changed raids. It changed the balance between a lone person and a group. It also changed money. The Winchester Repeating Arms Company turned this technology into an empire. The rifle became a symbol of American expansion and, in the same breath, a symbol of death. It appeared in wars, range conflicts, and the brutal displacement of native peoples. It was present in the destruction of bison herds. It was everywhere. By the time Sarah Pardee married into the Winchester family, the fortune was already built on a weapon that did its job too well. Sarah Lockwood Pardee Winchester was born in 1839. She was educated. She played piano. She spoke multiple languages. Friends described her as thoughtful and reserved. In 1862, she married William Wirt Winchester, the son of Oliver Winchester, the founder of the firearms company. They were young, they were wealthy, they lived in New Haven, Connecticut, surrounded by the rituals of upper-class life, dinner parties, charity events, the quiet performance of belonging. And then came the first loss. In 1866, Sarah gave birth to a daughter, Annie Pardee Winchester, a baby who should have been the bright center of the family. Annie lived only 6 weeks. She died of marasmus, a wasting disease that in that era was often connected to severe malnutrition or an inability to digest milk. The doctors could do little. Sarah held her child and watched her fade. If you have ever held a baby, you understand what that does to a person. Sarah withdrew. She stopped appearing in society. The house that once hosted guests became too large and too quiet. William tried to carry the weight, but grief does not always split evenly. It settles between people. It becomes a third presence at the table. They never had another child. 15 years later came the second blow. In 1881, William Wirt Winchester died of tuberculosis. He weakened slowly. He coughed blood. He lost weight. Sarah cared for him and watched him disappear in the same home, where their life had once looked safe. By 1881, Sarah was 43 years old, a widow, childless, and the heir to a fortune that came from a gun. Grief is heavy enough. Grief with guilt is worse. It becomes a question that never stops, asking itself, why them? Why me? What did this money cost? Sarah could not sleep, and in a country obsessed with the idea that the dead might still speak, she began looking for answers where desperate people often look. In the Dark, Chapter 3, The Medium and the Message. In the late 19th century, spiritualism was not a fringe obsession. It was a cultural current. Seances were held in parlors. Mediums were invited by respectable families. Grieving parents wanted proof that death was not the end. For some people, it was comfort. For others, it was entertainment. For many, it was both at once. Sarah Winchester was exactly the kind of person spiritualism could reach. Educated, religious, shattered by loss, searching for a structure that could hold the chaos of her mind. The details vary depending on who tells the story. Some accounts place a medium in Boston, some in New Haven. Some say Sarah went quietly on her own. Others say friends took her. What matters is the story that follows and the impact it had on the public imagination. The medium reportedly told Sarah she was being hunted by the spirits of those killed by Winchester rifles. Not one spirit, thousands, tens of thousands. People who died in wars. People who died on the frontier. People who died because that gun made killing easier. The message was simple and terrifying. Go west. Buy a house. Build. Keep building. Never stop. As long as the house was unfinished, the spirits would be confused, forced to wander. If construction stopped, the spirits would find her, and she would die. If you hear this as a modern person, you might call it a con, a grieving widow being manipulated. And it might have been. But grief does not respond to logic the way we want it to. When your life collapses, even a story can feel like a lifeline if it gives you a rule to follow. Sarah did not leave a diary explaining what she believed. She did not give interviews. We cannot open her mind and check the truth. We can only watch what she did next. She sold the New Haven mansion. she left much of her former life behind. She boarded a train heading west, across farmland and prairie, over mountains and desert, until she reached California. In the Santa Clara Valley, she found an unfinished farmhouse. 8 rooms, 2 stories. A wooden structure sitting on acres of fruit trees. It was not a palace. It was a beginning. She bought it, and then she called carpenters. In 1886, construction began, and in one form or another it continued until the night she died in 1922. Chapter 4. The House That Never Sleeps. If you picture construction, you picture a plan, blueprints, a timeline, an end. The Winchester project did not feel like that. Workers described a strange rhythm. They would frame a room and finish it with care. The next day, the room might be altered, moved, or simply abandoned. They would build a stair, then wall it off. They would install a door, then a new wall would swallow it. Sarah did not care about efficiency. She cared about continuity. The work had to keep moving. The house had to keep changing. At least, that is how it looked from the outside. Some of the odd features had practical explanations that later got buried under legend. Sarah suffered from arthritis. A staircase with shallow steps would be easier on painful joint. Interior windows could bring light into hallways that no longer touched an outside wall as new rooms were added. Old doorways could become useless when the layout changed and be left in place rather than patched over. But practical explanations do not erase the feeling of walking through a place that refuses to behave like a normal home. The house expanded in multiple directions. Wings extended, porches appeared, towers rose. A conservatory filled with art glass windows was added. A grand ballroom took shape with expensive details and musical instruments, and the oddities multiplied. A cabinet built only inches deep, like a stage prop. A chimney that stopped short, venting into the attic. A window set low in a wall, almost at the floor. Doors that opened onto blank walls. Then there were the ones that felt genuinely dangerous. A door on an upper floor that opened onto open air. A trapdoor in a place you would never expect. A staircase that climbed a few steps and ended in a ceiling. Tour guides later framed these as traps for spirits. Doors meant to make ghosts fall. Passages meant to mislead them. And that interpretation became powerful because it offered meaning. If the house was a weapon against the dead, then Sarah was not just grieving, she was fighting. But before we let that story settle, there is a part of the house that holds the legend in its tightest form, the room where Sarah was said to meet the dead. Chapter 5. The Seance Room. Deep inside the mansion, there is a small room that feels oddly private even when you are standing in it with a tour group. It has one entrance and multiple exits. There is a logic to that if you consider fire, safety. But legend does not care about logic. Legend cares about atmosphere. This space became known as the Seance Room. In the most repeated version, Sarah entered it at night. A bell rang at midnight to summon spirits. Another bell rang around 2 inches the morning to send them away. Servants and neighbors said they heard it. Workers said they heard footsteps afterward. The room became linked to the number 13. Hooks on the wall. Claims of 13 windows. Stories of 13 chimes. Not all of it can be confirmed. Some of it was likely added later. As the story evolved, what is documented is that a bell tower existed on the property and was used to call workers and serve as a fire alarm. The ghost story version turned that bell into a ritual tool. Here is what matters for the psychology of the place. When people believe a room is used for seances, the room becomes a stage. Every creak sounds like a footstep. Every draft feels like a presence. Every shadow looks intentional. And in a house already designed as a maze, suggestion becomes a powerful architect. Sarah never confirmed the seances publicly. She rarely spoke to outsiders at all. That silence let everyone else speak for her. Meanwhile, the house kept changing. Rooms were finished and then sealed. Entire wings were altered. Some spaces were left untouched for years. The more the house grew, the more it resembled a living thing that had learned to hide parts of itself. By 1900, if you entered without a guide, you could get lost within minutes. And that is not metaphor. The layout really did fold back on itself in ways that made people doubt their own sense of direction. If you want to understand why the Winchester House became a legend, you have to feel what it is like to walk through architecture that seems designed to break your Confidence. Chapter 6. The Architecture of Confusion. Imagine walking into a hallway that splits three ways. Each path lit the same. Each wall covered with the same paper. Each floor creaking with the same tone. You choose the left path, you take 3 turns. You open a door, and it is a wall. You back up, you turn around, you swear you came from the left. But now the hallway looks like the one you did not choose. Some corridors looped in ways that could bring you back to where you started without you realizing it. Other corridors ended abruptly. Others ended in a door that did not open. The stairs added another layer of unease. One famous staircase has 44 steps but rises only about 9 feet. Each step is shallow. It feels like climbing in slow motion. This design is often linked to Sarah's arthritis, and that explanation makes sense. It is also true that to someone unfamiliar, it feels surreal, like a staircase built for a person with a different body. Another staircase rises a short distance and ends against the ceiling. It looks like a mistake that became permanent. Doors are everywhere. Some open into ordinary rooms, some open into spaces that should not exist. Windows face windows. You can look through glass and see another room instead of the outside world. If you live in a normal house, windows mean escape. They mean distance. They mean sky. In this house, a window can mean the opposite. It can mean being watched by another. Empty room. The mansion also contains beauty. Stained glass glows with careful craft. Woodwork is ornate. Details repeat with purpose. Spiders appear in designs. Web patterns show up in art, glass, and carving. That contrast is part of what makes the place unnerving. It is not a ruin. It is not a broken shack. It is a wealthy home with expensive work, and yet it behaves like a puzzle, built to resist the person trying to solve it. By the early 20th century, the house had grown taller than anything else around it. At one point, it reached 7 stories at its highest. Towers rose above the orchards and could be seen from the road. Then the earth moved. Chapter 7. April 18, 1906. At 5:12 inches the morning on the 18th of April, 1906, the San Francisco earthquake struck. The city to the north took the worst of it, followed by fires and massive destruction. Thousands died. San Jose felt the shaking too. At the Winchester estate, the ground rolled, chimneys cracked, windows shattered. The tallest sections groaned and then gave way. The 7-story tower suffered severe damage and collapsed down through lower floors. Dust filled the halls. The house creaked and moaned, not like a haunted sound effect, but like a structure struggling to stay upright. Later accounts and tour lore place Sarah inside the mansion when the quake hit. One popular version says she was asleep in a bedroom when a door frame warped and the door jammed, and that a servant forced it open. But historians note there is no solid evidence proving she was in the house at that exact moment. What is not in dispute is the damage. Chimneys cracked, windows shattered, and the tallest sections suffered. Severe failure. Sarah survived the earthquake, but something changed. The workers expected repairs, rebuilding, restoration of the grander parts of the house. Instead, Sarah ordered parts of the damaged sections sealed off. Rooms were closed. Doors were nailed shut. The front portion of the house was effectively abandoned. From that point forward, the mansion turned inward. It grew outward more than upward. New additions emphasize sprawl, not height. This is a crucial moment because it is where legend and architecture overlap in a way that can be confirmed. Many of the most famous doors and windows that appear to lead nowhere are connected to this earthquake. Features that once led to upper levels became stranded when parts collapsed and were never rebuilt. In other words, the house did not begin as a deliberate trap of nonsense. Some of its nonsense is the scar tissue of disaster, and that scar tissue was then absorbed into the ghost story. If you want a true psychological climax, it is here. A woman builds for years. A disaster strikes. The house breaks. She seals parts of it, like a wound. Then she keeps building anyway. That is not just a haunted house story. That is a portrait of a person who refuses to let the world have the last word. Chapter 8. Why the workers stayed. You might think an earthquake would end the project. It nearly killed their employer. It damaged the structure. It made the job more dangerous. But the workers stayed. Some stayed because of money. Sarah paid well. She paid on time. She paid in cash. During times when other jobs disappeared, this project continued. That alone can keep a crew loyal for years. But there was more than wages. Sarah fed the workers. Hot meals, coffee, bread, fruit from the orchards, little things that mattered when you were used to being treated as disposable. Stories also persisted that Sarah helped workers when they were sick or injured, that she kept some on pay even during hardship. Not every story can be verified, but the pattern fits what we know about her private generosity through charitable donations. This matters because it complicates the image of the mad widow. A person can be reclusive and still be attentive. A person can be haunted by grief and still run an organized operation. A person can be strange in private and kind in public. The workers also became a wall between Sarah and the outside world. Reporters wanted inside, neighbors wanted gossip, tourists wanted a peek at the dawn. Eccentric, millionaire widow. The workers had no reason to help them. This was their job, their stability, their livelihood. So the mansion remained closed to casual eyes, and that privacy gave the legend more oxygen. When you cannot see what is happening, your mind fills in the gaps. Chapter 9. The Woman the World Wanted to See. By the early 1900s, Sarah Winchester had become the kind of figure newspapers could not resist. A wealthy widow, a bizarre mansion, rumors of seances, endless construction, a gun, fortune tied to violence. This was the perfect story for an era fascinated by the very rich and the very strange. Articles painted Sarah as a recluse, driven mad by grief and fear. They described midnight rituals. They described bells and spirits. They described a woman who believed she had to build to survive. Sarah did not correct them. She did not feed the press. She did not offer a careful explanation. Silence became a blank screen for projection. Some stories grew absurd. Claims that she ate at a table set for 13. Claims that she never let servants see her face. Claims that she wore a veil at all times. These make for headlines. They do not come with strong evidence. What is clearer is the pattern. Sarah avoided publicity. She kept the property private. She kept working. And the house itself became proof to outsiders that something was wrong. People often treat architecture as if it cannot lie. A room is a room. A door is a door. A stair is a stair. Surely such features must express the mind of the person who built them. So if a house feels irrational, we assume the person must have been irrational too. But building continuously for decades without a single fixed master plan can produce chaos, even with a clear mind. Additions swallow old features. Doorways become obsolete. Windows become interior. The house can become strange without the builder being insane. Still, the public did not want complexity. It wanted a curse. And curses are easier to sell than grief. As Sarah aged, the construction slowed. It did not stop completely, but the frantic expansion gave way to maintenance and smaller changes. By the 1910s, the house reached its greatest size. Then the sound of constant hammering became less constant. The widow was tired. Chapter 10. The Last Rooms. Age does not announce itself. It arrives in small humiliations. Your hand shakes when you hold a pen. Your joints ache when you climb. Your breath shortens. Sarah's arthritis worsened. The shallow stairs she had shaped into the house were not of quirk anymore. They were a necessity. Servants heard her cane tapping at night, a faint rhythm moving through the halls. Tap, tap, pause, then movement again. She changed bedrooms more slowly now, sometimes because she needed to be close to the staff, sometimes because she could not manage certain staircases on painful days. Instructions for the workers came less frequently. Some days there was nothing new to build. Crews repaired what existed. They painted. They replaced boards. They fixed windows. The house was no longer expanding like a living organism. It was sustaining itself. Sarah spent more time in quiet rooms. A conservatory where light filtered through, colored glass. A sitting space where she could watch patterns of sunlight move across the floor. The bell legends remained, but even those became intermittent in the stories. Some nights were silent. Other nights, a chime was said to cut through the dark. In her final months, Sarah moved her bed to a simple ground floor room. Not a grand suite, not a tower. A quiet space with plain walls and a window. On the night of the 4th of September, 1922, she went to sleep. She died in her bed before dawn. She was 83. There was no supernatural spectacle, no final earthquake, no dramatic curse claim proven, true or false. Just an old woman dying quietly. And then, for the first time in decades, the house fell completely silent. No saws, no hammers, no crews shifting rooms, no late-night footsteps in unfinished end halls. The silence itself became a kind of ending. Chapter 11. What the heirs found. After Sarah Winchester's death, the people left to handle the estate faced a practical nightmare. Her lawyer and surviving family, including her niece Daisy, had to inventory what she left behind, decide what could be sold, and figure out what to do with a mansion that was costly to maintain and already in poor repair. The mansion was massive, expensive to maintain, impossible to sell as a normal residence, and worst of all, hard to even navigate. Lawyers, accountants, and appraisers arrived with clipboards and tape measures. They got lost. Doors led to unexpected places. Staircases appeared where they should not be. Rooms were hidden behind rooms. Even workers who had spent years building parts of the house could struggle to remember paths, because the house changed so often that memory became unreliable. The inventory took weeks. The house at the time was often described with numbers that still circulate today. About 160 rooms, about 2,000 doors, about 10000 windows, dozens of stairways, dozens of fireplaces, many chimneys. In storage spaces, they found construction materials left in quantity: lumber, glass, wallpaper, hardware. It looked like a person preparing to build for decades more. They also found something they did not find. They did not find a clear explanation. No diary that said, "I build to confuse spirits." No manifesto. No neat rationale. The seance room yielded atmosphere but not answers. The hooks did not speak. The walls did not confess. So the house remained what it had always been: a physical object that generates theories because it refuses to provide proof. The estate needed money. Furniture and possessions were auctioned off. Rooms were emptied. Truckloads carried away what Sarah had accumulated. What remained was the structure itself, too strange to ignore and too expensive to keep as a private home. So the heirs made a decision that would lock the legend into place. They opened the gates. Chapter 12, the tour that turned grief into a curse. Within a year of Sarah's death, and by 1923, the house began operating as a tourist attraction. When you turn a home into a business, you have to choose a story. You can tell visitors about architecture, about craft, about an unusual project directed by a woman in an era that expected women to disappear. Or you can tell them about ghosts. Ghosts sell tickets, so the marketing leaned hard into fear. Tour guides emphasized curses, spirits, and seances. Every architectural oddity became evidence of paranoia. Every sealed room became proof of haunting. Some features genuinely were strange. Some were linked to arthritis, changing plans, or the earthquake. But the tour narrative did not need nuance. It needed chills. Visitors came by the thousands. Families drove from nearby cities. Travelers added it to their route through California. Children dared each other to go inside and not flinch. People reported cold spots, footsteps, whispers, the feeling of being watched. You can explain those experiences in many ways. Old houses creak, drafts move through unsealed spaces. Stained glass distorts light. Suggestion primes the brain to interpret normal sounds as meaningful. A guide lowering their voice in a room labeled seance room will make anyone listen harder for ghosts. But belief is not always about evidence. Belief is often about need. If the house is haunted, then Sarah's life had a clear antagonist, a curse, a force outside her control. The building project becomes a heroic act of survival. If the house is not haunted, then Sarah spent decades building a labyrinth because grief and guilt demanded movement, and that is harder to accept. The haunted story is easier, so it spread. Decade after decade, the house appeared in travel brochures, Haunted America books, and later television shows. Psychics claimed energy, paranormal investigators claimed recordings, and the quieter truth, the human truth, became harder to hear under the noise. Chapter 13. Facts that change the way you see her. There is a trap hidden inside the Winchester legend. It is the trap of thinking that a strange project must come from a simple cause. Cursed, mad, haunted, pick one. Real life rarely works like that. Sarah Winchester lived through an era of immense social change. She also lived with chronic pain. She managed an estate. She supervised workers. She controlled finances. She gave to charity. She stayed private. These are the actions of a person who functioned, even if her inner world was complicated. Many oddities in the house have plausible explanations. The shallow staircase aligns with arthritis. Interior windows can be explained by the need for light as additions swallowed exterior walls. Doors that lead nowhere can be explained by the collapse in ceiling after the 1906 earthquake. Some traps and drains have practical plumbing functions. None of this erases the legends, but it reframes them. Sarah may have believed in spiritualism. Many people did. She may have held private rituals. She may have found comfort in the idea that the dead could speak, but that does not automatically equal madness. The house can be a blend of many motives, a coping mechanism, a project that gave structure to days that might otherwise collapse into silence, a way to keep her hands and mind busy when her heart had no place to put its love. And yes, possibly, a way to manage guilt. Not guilt because she pulled the trigger, but guilt because she lived comfortably from the system that profited from killing. If you inherit money that comes from violence, you cannot undo the source. But you can choose what you do with the money next. Sarah chose to pour much of her life into wages, craft, and constant work. Whether that is redemption is not a fact, it is a judgment. But it is worth holding in your mind the next time you hear the easy headline, "Mad Widow Builds House for Ghosts." Because the harder truth might be more haunting. Widow builds because the alternative is sitting still with the sound of an empty nursery. In her head, Chapter 14, The House That Refuses to Die. The Winchester Mystery House stands today as a landmark and a business. It has been restored, stabilized, and retrofitted for safety. It is under constant maintenance. The work never truly stops. It only changes its purpose from expansion to preservation. Over a century after Sarah's death, visitors still walk through the halls and react the same way. They laugh nervously at the stairs that go nowhere. They take photos of doors that open into empty air. They hush their voices in the seance room. They step carefully, as if the house might shift under them. Modern tours offer different narratives depending on what you choose. Some focus on haunted claims. Some focus on architecture and history. Some focus on the people who worked there. And the house still keeps secrets. Rooms have been found sealed behind walls. Old wallpaper, preserved in darkness. Fixtures, untouched. Spaces that remind you how easily a maze can hide even from people who think they have mapped it. The mansion sits now among suburbs and busy roads. The orchards are mostly gone. The isolation is gone. But the feeling inside certain corridors remains. Not because the house is supernatural, but because it was built to break normal expectations. It was built to make you question your direction, your assumptions, your certainty about what should be on the other side of a door. Chapter 15, The Final Question. Late at night, after the last tours leave, the lights go dark. The mansion sits quiet. Old wood shifts as temperature drops. Floors creak, pipes groan. Air moves through long passages. Security cameras watch rooms that once held candlelight and the sound of hammers. Employees have stories. A door that will not stay shut. A footstep sound on an upper floor. A window found unlatched. All of it can have simple causes. Old hardware, warped frames, human error. But stories pile up because the house invites them. It was designed, intentionally or accidentally, to make your imagination feel like an observer. So, let me offer you the only question that matters more than ghosts. If you were Sarah Winchester, and you had lost the people you loved, and you woke every morning in a life that no longer made sense, what would you build just to keep breathing? Would you build a normal house and accept the silence? Or would you build a maze so that your grief could never find you sitting still? Sarah never wrote her answer down. She built it, and that is why the Winchester Mystery House will always feel alive. Not because it contains spirits, but because it contains the shape of a human mind, trying to survive. Otru. If you want more true stories where the facts are stranger than the legends, tell me which place you want to explore next. And if you ever visit the Winchester Mystery House, stand in front of that second-floor door that opens into nothing. Do not step through it. Just look at it and ask yourself who needed that door to exist. Chapter 16. A walk through the house in Sarah's time. To really feel what made this place different, do not picture a polished museum tour. Picture a working home that was also a construction site. You arrive at the property, and the first thing you notice is the smell. Fresh cut wood, varnish, plaster drying, fruit trees in the orchard, damp air drifting in from the valley fog. A servant meets you because Sarah rarely met visitors at the door. You are led inside, along a path chosen for you. It is not a straight shot. It turns. It doubles back. It changes levels with short stair runs. At each turn you can hear work. A hammer in the distance. A saw. The scrape of a plane on wood. Voices kept low. You pass a doorway and see a room open on one side. Studs visible, like the ribs of a ship. In another room, a window frame is being fitted. In another, a wall is being fitted, measured and marked. The house is in motion. If you ask what is being built, the workers do not answer. They keep moving. It is not hostility, it is habit. They have learned that questions do not lead anywhere, and that the only reliable part of this job is the next task on the list. The servant guides you into a sitting room, perhaps near the conservatory where light comes through colored glass. You wait. The air is warm with the smell of wood and old fabric. Sometimes Sarah appears. When she does, descriptions emphasize how small she was. Under 5 feet, dressed in dark clothing, her face composed, her voice quiet. She does not entertain for long. She offers polite conversation and then ends the meeting when she tires. If she does not appear, the servant apologizes. Mrs. Winchester is indisposed. Either way, you leave by a different route than the one you came in. This is the detail that stays with people. The route out is never the route in. If you are a visitor, that feels deliberate, as if the house is guiding you like a hand on your shoulder. If you are a skeptic, it feels like the natural result of a home that has been altered so many times that no single corridor is the obvious main corridor. But even the skeptical explanation cannot remove the feeling. You walk out slightly disoriented. Not lost, but less certain. And you carry that uncertainty with you into the story you tell later. That is how legends spread, not from proof, but from experience that is hard to label. Chapter 17. The numbers and what they mean. When people talk about the Winchester Mystery House, they often cite a list of numbers that sound like a myth. 160 rooms, about 2,000 doors, about 10000 windows, 47 stairways and fireplaces, 17 chimneys, 13 bathrooms, 6 kitchens, about 2,400 square feet. Those figures are widely repeated because they are easy to remember and because the house feels like it must be measured in excess. But the most important number is not the size. It is the timeline, 1886 to 1922. Those years include economic depressions, labor unrest, epidemics, and rapid technological change. They include the shift from gaslight to electric light, from horse-drawn streets to early cars, from rural orchards to growing towns. Through all of that, Sarah kept directing work on her property, even if construction was not literally 24 hours a day, every day. The project lasted long enough to become the central structure of her life. That matters because it frames the mansion less as a single act of madness and more as a long-term practice, like a person who runs every day, or a person who writes every night, or a person who cleans the same kitchen counter again and again because order is the only thing that makes the mind quiet. A house can be a building. It can also be a ritual. Chapter 18. What the earthquake left behind. After the 1906 quake, Sarah sealed off damaged areas. The front of the house, parts of the tower, and multiple rooms were closed. Some were not reopened for decades. In a normal home, damage is repaired until the old normal returns. In this house, damage became part of the story. A doorway that once led to a balcony can become a door to nowhere if the balcony disappears. A window that once looked out can become a window into another room if an addition swallows the outside wall. A staircase can become a staircase to nowhere if the floor above is removed or sealed. When you walk the tours today, you are often looking at the aftermath of that change. The earthquake did not create every odd feature, but it created enough to give the legend physical anchors. It gave the story objects that look like evidence, even when the true cause is structural. This is why the Winchester House is a perfect engine for myth. It contains features that look intentional, even when they were created by accident, change, or disaster. And then the human mind does what it always does. It tells a story that makes the chaos feel designed. Chapter 19. The Tour Guide's Problem. If you are a tour guide, you face a choice. You can say, here is a door that opens to a drop because the balcony was removed after the 1906 earthquake and the area was sealed. That is true, and it is also flat. Or you can say, here is a door built to trick spirits into falling. That might be false, and it is electric. Most businesses choose electricity, so the haunted script becomes the default. It is repeated so often that it begins to feel like truth. Visitors tell friends, friends tell friends. The story becomes part of the house the way wallpaper becomes part of a wall. But there is a cost. The haunted version turns Sarah into a caricature, a frightened old woman running from invisible enemies. The human version is harder to digest, because it forces you to look at grief as a force that can restructure a life, not dramatically in a single moment, but slowly, through years of repetition. A ghost story asks you to fear a spirit. A grief story asks you to fear what can happen inside a living person. Chapter 20. Why this story stays with you. At the end of the day, you will leave the house and step into normal daylight. You will hear cars and voices. You will check your phone. You will get a coffee. And yet, if the story worked, one image will stay. A door that opens into nothing. A staircase that climbs and then stops. A room that feels private even with strangers inside it. Those features are not just curiosities, they are symbols. They symbolize the moment when a person tries to build meaning out of loss. Sarah Winchester could not bring back her daughter. She could not bring back her husband. She could not rewrite the history of the rifle fortune. But she could pick up a pencil and tell someone to move a wall. She could make the house change when her life would not. That is why this mansion does not leave your mind the way other tourist attractions do. It is not just weird. It is intimate. It is a record of someone trying to live. Final outro. If you want to understand the Winchester Mystery House, do not start by asking, is it haunted? Start by asking, what kind of pain makes a person build for decades? Because when you ask that, the house stops being a rumor about ghosts. It becomes something much closer and much more uncomfortable. It becomes a mirror. Chapter 21. The Gilded Age and the Hunger for Meaning. Sarah's story sits inside a wider American mood. The late 19th century was the Gilded Age, a period of enormous wealth for a few and instability for many. Railroads, industry, and finance created fortunes that seemed unreal. At the same time, accidents, disease, and economic crashes could erase a working family's security overnight. In that environment, people searched for explanations. Some found them in religion, some found them in reform movements. Some found them in spectacle. Spiritualism offered a bridge between all three. It promised comfort and also offered a performance. It was a way to talk about death without surrendering to it. So when the public heard about a widow with a gun fortune, living alone, altering a house into a maze, their minds did what minds do. They took cultural ingredients already on the table and baked them into a story that tasted familiar. Wealth, death, curses, hidden rituals. But the reality of building and living in a large home was also changing. Houses were becoming showcases of technology. Indoor plumbing, gas fixtures, electric light, and new heating methods entered the domestic space. Wealthy homeowners experimented. They added, modified, upgraded. A home could be a project as much as a shelter. Sarah took that idea and pushed it to an extreme. The question is not whether her house is unusual. It is. The question is why she needed unusual. Chapter 22. San Jose before the myth. When Sarah arrived in the Santa Clara Valley, the region did not look like the San Jose we think of today. This was an agricultural landscape. Orchards stretched across property lines. The air carried the smell of fruit and damp soil. Roads were quieter. Neighbors were farther apart. Fog rolled in and lingered. That setting matters. Isolation is not only emotional, it is physical. A person can disappear more easily when there are acres between them and the nearest curious eyes. Sarah bought what began as an ordinary farmhouse, and then she expanded. As additions spread, the house became its own small world inside the orchard. Workmen came and went. Servants managed meals, cleaning, and errands. The gates and the trees made a natural boundary that protected her privacy. Privacy is a quiet kind of power. It is also a quiet kind of loneliness. In a private estate, your thoughts can loop without interruption. A project can become your companion. A routine can become your anchor. If you want to understand why a person keeps building, consider the alternative. Ending. Construction would mean ending the daily rhythm. It would mean waking up with nothing to do except remember. Chapter 23. How a house becomes a labyrinth. A maze does not have to be designed on paper. It can emerge from a series of local decisions made over a long time. Build a new wing. Now, a hallway that used to end at an exterior wall becomes an interior corridor. You add a window to bring light in. That window now faces another window. Visitors find it strange. Add a staircase to reach a new level. Later, you change the plan. The level is removed or sealed. The staircase remains. Visitors call it a staircase to nowhere. Install a door for a future balcony. The balcony is never built or is removed after. Damage. The door remains. Visitors call it a door to death. This is not a defense of every oddity, but it is a model of how continuous renovation can produce features that look intentional even when they are remnants. Now add one more ingredient. A homeowner who changes her mind frequently and does not prioritize neatness. A homeowner who treats the house as a living draft. One room at a time, revised and revised again. Over decades, revision becomes the architecture. The house becomes a visible record of indecision and persistence. Not random, not tidy, alive. Chapter 24. The myth of non-stop construction. One of the most repeated claims is that construction ran 24 hours a day for 38 years. That image is powerful. It turns the house into a machine, and Sarah into someone running from a deadline. The reality is likely more uneven. Large projects pause for health, logistics, and weather. Sarah took breaks and traveled at times. Crews shifted from expansion to repairs. The work could slow and still feel constant to neighbors who heard hammering at odd hours. What cannot be dismissed is the duration. From 1886 to 1922, the project remained active, long enough to become legendary. Even if the house was not always under literal round, the clock construction, it was under continual alteration. Sometimes legend exaggerates the schedule to express the feeling. The feeling is that Sarah could not stop. The feeling is that the house was always becoming something else. And feelings matter, because they are what viewers remember. Your job in a video is to give the audience both the feeling and the fact, and to be honest about the gap between them. Chapter 25. The Seance Room as a private technology. Whether Sarah held seances or not, the idea of a seance room tells us something important. It tells us people believed there was a private center to the house, a place where decisions were made in the dark. The room is described as hard to reach. That detail alone creates tension. If a space is difficult to access, it feels important. It feels secret. The legend of bells adds ritual. A sound that marks time. A sound that tells servants to stay away. A sound that sets the hour of the supernatural. But bells can also be ordinary. A bell can call workers. A bell can signal staff. In an estate with long hallways, a bell can be a practical communication tool. This is the pattern again. Ordinary tools acquire supernatural meaning when the surrounding story invites it. Chapter 26. The earthquake as a character. The 1906 earthquake is not just an event in this story, it is a character. It is the one force that does not negotiate with wealth or with fear. In storytelling terms, it is the moment the world answers Sarah's obsession with a louder obsession. The ground itself moves. If Sarah believed she was being hunted, an earthquake would feel like proof. If she did not believe in a literal curse, An earthquake would still feel like fate, because it hits the one thing she had been controlling. The decision to seal off rooms after the quake reads like a psychological act, even if it is also practical. It is a way of saying this part is over, this wound is closed. Do not look inside it. And then the most human detail, she keeps building anyway. That persistence after disaster is what turns the story from a curiosity into something that lingers. Many people can understand starting a project in grief. Fewer can understand continuing after the world breaks it. Chapter 27, the end of a rumor and the start of a business. Sarah died on the 5th of September, 1922. Construction stopped because the person giving instructions was gone. Almost immediately, the house faced a modern problem. What do you do with a giant property that is expensive to maintain and difficult to live in? Turning it into a tourist attraction was a practical solution, but it also locked the story into a particular shape. A tour needs a script needs a hook needs danger. So the haunted angle became the default narrative. This is important because it explains why certain claims are louder than others. A calm story about a widow managing grief does not sell as easily as a cursed story with bells and spirits. Once a story becomes a product, it tends to harden. It gets repeated. It becomes the house's second architecture, built out of words. Chapter 29, a final scene. You can see, before we close, I want to leave you with a scene that is fully grounded in what we know, and yet it feels like fiction because it is so stark. It is the morning after Sarah dies. Staff walk the corridors and realize there are no new instructions. No note, no sketch, no servant sent to the foreman, no bell calling anyone to work. For decades, the house had been defined by sound, hammers, saws, footsteps, the small violence of construction turning raw wood into walls. Now there is only the soft settling of an old building, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own breathing. That silence is a fact. Whatever you believe about curses, the story ends with quiet. Not because the mansion was finished, but because the one person who kept it moving was gone. If you are looking for a psychological punch, it is here. The house did not stop because it reached a goal. It stopped because a human body finally reached its limit. When visitors walk through the Winchester Mystery House today, they walk through the aftermath of that limit. A project frozen in mid-sentence. And that is why the place remains disturbing. Not because it suggests a ghost, but because it suggests a life interrupted. A life that tried to build its way around pain and never found the last wall that would make it feel safe. Chapter 30, New Haven and the Distance Between Stories. Sarah is buried in New Haven, Connecticut, beside William and their daughter, Annie. After everything, the three names sit together again, far from the California mansion that made her famous. The gravestone is simple, names and dates, no carved staircase, no carved spider web, no mention of a mystery house. If you stood there without context, you would never guess what her life became. That contrast is the final tension in this story. Public legend versus private reality. The public sees a haunted mansion in California. The private record ends in a quiet cemetery plot in Connecticut. Somewhere between those 2 points is the real Sarah Winchester. A person who did not leave us a clear explanation, only a structure. And structures invite interpretation. So if you retell this story, keep the dates and keep the facts, but do not treat her like a cartoon villain or a cartoon victim. Let her remain complex. Because in the end, whether you believe in ghosts or not, the Winchester Mystery House is evidence of something we all recognize. When life hurts too much, people will build rituals. They will build routines, they will build projects, they will build anything that gives the day a shape. Sarah built a mansion that refuses to have a neat floor plan, because grief rarely has a neat shape either.